I'm going to explain three gap patterns. There are both three gap up patterns and three gap down patterns, but I want to explain the logic of finding a gap and how it's achieved. The First of all, the gaps up, we have in the system we have 22 market force recognition indicators. We have, in addition to that, there are 7 short-term trend lines, and then there are the upper and lower band lines and the master long-term trend line on the candle, in the candle chart. There's also 2 special use lines, swing gray, which is a deep cycle indicator, and swing blue, which is a crossover indicator. When it crosses over swing red or swing green, you're either in an uptrend or a downtrend. When it crosses over green, it can be a weak start to an uptrend, but when it crosses over red, the blue line is traveling up above red, you're usually in a nice uptrend. Likewise, when the blue is traveling under green and down, it is typically a stronger downtrend. And all three, the blue, the red, and the green, are all slow-moving lines. And we don't use those to find changes in cycles, but more on the lines of verifying cycles. The 20 patterns up and the 20 patterns down, these are types of patterns. There's more than 20 in each group. Within the patterns type up, there are 3 patterns that we use to locate gaps. Those are the identical indicators, the down touch indicators, and the proximity group indicators. The identical indicators are those 22 market force recognition indicators that I talked about. Those are the heart of the system. Those are the ones that recognize changes in pressure and forces within the stock. They appear in all 5 subcharts, and when we have a majority of them, in other words, when we have 12 of them, we consider that to be the basic rules for a gap up. If you have, let's say, 14 identical indicators, and that would be like 14 of them in a BOC pattern or a TOC pattern or a right leg W pattern, and you had all 14 in the same pattern, that would be a 1 pattern group. More than 12 qualifies for that, for the identical indicators. You can have 2 patterns. Let's say you have 9 and 6. You have 9 patterns in a right leg W, and you have 6 patterns in a bottlenose up pattern. Both of those next day are up. That is a 2 pattern group, and they would, and that total would obviously be 15 total indicators, showing us that the evidence supports a gap, movement in the up direction. The down touch is in the trend chart. About 75 to 85% of the down touches and up touches that occur within the system occur in the trend chart. They obviously occur in all the other charts, all the other subcharts, but the majority of the activity is in the trend chart. You have the fast lines, red, green, and gray, trend red, green, and gray, and you have the slow moving lines, that's the trio. That's one of the three groups of the 7 short-term trend lines. The trend trio is the yellow, pink, blue lines. On the master platform chart, the trio lines are drawn in wide, indicating a slower moving line. The same is true with the power orange and green. They are slower moving lines. They are the other group of the short-term trend line group. And then there is the third group, swing green and red. And they, of course, are wide as well. And those three groups make up the short-term trend line. When the trend red, green, or gray down touch one of the three trio lines, yellow, pink, and blue, that is referred to as a down touch, and it reacts in a reversal situation going back up. Remember, the entire system, the DTVB system, is based on reversal recognition. We search for and find cycle tops and cycle bottoms. We identify those turnarounds, and more importantly, we identify the strength of the turnaround. And that's primarily done through indicator line length or through pattern line length. For example, a BOC pattern is a down-up pattern. It's a V-shaped pattern. When the left leg is shorter than the right leg, or in other words, the right leg is higher than the left leg, you have a BOC higher pattern. When the right is shorter than the left, it's a BOC lower pattern. Higher patterns depict stronger forces within the market. Stronger pressure has been identified. The movement is larger. However you want to think about it, that's what happens. When you have a BOC pattern at the bottom of a cycle, a BOC higher pattern will typically generate stronger movement in the days to come. That's indicator line length in the BOC pattern. The down touches that can occur are the three fast lines, the trend red, green, and gray. And they down touch those three lines. They also down touch the zero line, and they also down touch underneath the zero line. Now, when trend red down touches underneath the zero, there is no line that it touches, or no item that it touches. It just goes down underneath the zero. But the turnaround for that, the reversal signal for that is the crossover zero. When trend red crosses over zero, the next day it goes up. Okay, now that's obviously with additional supporting evidence to identify that turn up, because you can easily get a trend red that'll cross over zero and continue going down. Occasionally we will have a second day in which, and on that second day, trend green crosses over zero, and then everything reverts back up. The sixth down touch is actually in an opposite direction. That's when we really got a lot of force going on, and we call it a sky touch. It's when trend red and green are up. They've usually, trend red, as you know, when trend red crosses over trend green, that's the start of an uptrend. And when you have the second day after that, or the third day after the crossover, because you've got the crossover day, then you've got 1, 2, or 3 days more, and a gap up can occur, and we refer to it as a sky touch. Typically, trend red is above the trend yellow line, but that's not always the case, especially if you've got adequate amounts of supporting evidence, because they can happen on one day after the crossover, or they typically occur the second day after a crossover or the third day after a crossover. After they get to the fourth day, we no longer utilize them or think of them in the fashion of a sky touch situation. And so that defines the down touch requirement, or the second pattern requirement of a gap up. The third pattern requirement is called a proximity group. And the proximity group the proximity group has two types of definitions. You have proximity shapes. In other words, the BOC pattern, the TOC pattern. You have those shapes, which are basically identical to the patterns of the market force recognition indicators. And because they actually are the market force recognition indicators, but that we use there's a separate sheet because there are some nuances that we talk about as slightly different cases in the proximity group. Now, the Power 4. This is an acronym for the pink, blue, white, and yellow lines. We call them the Power 4. If you don't have the yellow, you are dealing with the Power 3. If you add Zion to the Power 4, you're talking about the Power 5. And if you add Power Red, you're talking about the Power 6. And so our primary emphasis is on the Power 4 and the Power 5 lines. Those appear in shapes. Those groups also appear in location. For example, Power Zion is the dividing line is Power Orange. When Power Zion is under Power Orange and the Power 4 are above Power Orange, that is a location pattern that identifies a gap up. It does not mean that a gap up is going to occur because you have to have the identical indicators and you have to have the down touches in the trend chart. And of course, you can have all of that information and you don't have any supporting evidence. And supporting evidence would be like swing pink going up. Or you'd have another pattern like a red spike is a pattern with zip red down and under 50, zip yellow down and under, or down but above 50. That's a red spike, and next day it goes up. But that's a whole pattern in itself, and when you get additional patterns that support the three patterns that you are looking at, that's supporting evidence. You can get swing Zion lowest. And we know that when swing Zion, it tracks the trades, tracks the buyers in and out of the market. When swing Zion is at 0, there is a huge number of people leaving the market. When swing Zion is at 100, there are a huge number of trades coming into the market. Technically, I refer to it as buyers coming into the market. When zip, I think I said that right. When zip green is at 100, zip green it's a case where there are many people coming into the market. When zip green is at 0, there are many people leaving the market. Zip Zion is the grandfather of zip green in it, and when it is at 0, there's a huge number of people leaving the market. So zip green and zip Zion are calculators or identification lines for the trades taking place. They're not market forces or pressures identified. They're a calculation of trades. It's important to keep in mind. Now, the locations are more important than the shapes. You can have, as I mentioned, Zion under orange and the power 4 above orange. You can have the power 3 above orange and yellow under orange. Because if you don't recall or you're not familiar with it, the yellow twins, that's zip yellow and power yellow. When those two are lowest and going up, you're in an uptrend. When those two are highest and going down, you're in a downtrend. And it's very powerful information. You can stay in a trade based on those two. And in fact, you can continue in that trade even when one gets buried under some of the other indicator lines. Typically, zip, because all of the indicator lines on the zip chart are really fast, the zip yellow line gets buried first and would then theoretically tell you that the pattern is over and get out. Now, you can have the power 6 all above power orange. You can have the power 6 all under power orange. You can have 5 above and Zion under, or vice versa. You can have the power, there's probably about a dozen combinations of the power 3, 4, 5, and 6 in different locations, either above or under the power 0 line. Then you can have divergence. For example, power blue and pink can be going down, whereas white and yellow can be going up. You can have another type of directional divergence is when Zion is down, especially when it's down and under power orange, and the power 4 is up. And so you have location divergence and directional divergence. And when we think of Zion under orange and the power 4 above orange, that's divergence. And typically when Zion is under orange and the power 4 are above orange, you have stronger gaps. Now, all that being said, you have to have you can think of the pattern, the proximity groups, or you can think of the power 4 and the power Zion line. You can call it power 4 or power 5. However you want to think of it, the proximity groups are one pattern. And you have to have the location along with the condition of one of the 7 patterns that are identified in the proximity pattern group. And you have to have the down touches, and you have to have the identical indicators. We do not understand why those 3 patterns work, but they do, especially for gaps up. Gaps down have much more flexibility. We still deal with the 3 patterns associated with gaps up, but there is a much larger variety of when gaps down occur from the perspective of different indicator arrangements or locations or directions. So my primary purpose in this video was to describe the 3 patterns. There are numerous other videos about 3 gap patterns up and 3 gap patterns down, and those specifically deal with whichever way the gap is going. But generally speaking, what I just described is what we refer to as the 3-gap pattern. Most of the time we think of gaps up, but some would concentrate more on gaps down. Whichever way you choose to deal with that is fine. It doesn't make any difference. But recognize that you can easily count the number of identical indicators in 1, 2, or 3 pattern groups. You can easily identify a down touch. In fact, we have every type of down touch in the trend chart of drafted, created, and all you have to do is go to the development environment and pick off, trend green down touches trend pink, or trend gray down touches 0, or trend red down touches under 0. All of those patterns, all of those down touches are there for your use. There's well over 400. There's probably close to 500. I haven't even counted them, but I know there's over 400 in a quick analysis. The patterns that we use, most of what I've been talking about is obviously been in relationship to gaps. There are many other types of patterns that we use to find one-day changes or multiple day changes like uptrends or downtrends. But when you take the identical patterns and you make that count, you take the down touches and you identify that there's at least one down touch, and there has to be a down touch, and the up touch, the sky touch qualifies as an up touch. The sky touch example qualifies as a down touch because there's six ways in order for the trend lines to qualify for a gap up. And the sky touch is nothing more than real strong movement upward, and oftentimes those end up in really nice gaps up. Some people concentrate just on the sky touch examples. Now, those two together are real easy to identify. What is not easy to identify, at least in the beginning when you're starting out, is determining your proximity group locations with your proximity group shapes, and then verifying additional supporting evidence if there's any. Because sometimes you'll have the 3 patterns together and you look over in the other chart like the zip and the swing and the price chart, and you'll see a whole level of 3, 4, 5, 6 other indicators that tell you that you're going to have a movement in the up direction next day. When you have all the 3 patterns, and when you have a sufficient amount of supporting information, you then get a gap up. If you have a small amount of supporting information, you're likely to get a small gap. It could be, however, a small gap and then a huge go up. So sometimes it gaps up $1 and goes up $3. Sometimes it gaps up $4 and goes up a little bit and then comes down. Once it gaps, we don't know what the reaction is going to be. We just can come close in identifying stronger gaps versus weaker gaps. And it doesn't always work. Sometimes we've got all the information that says we're going to have a nice gap, but we don't have a lot of supporting evidence. And what happens is we get 5 green candles in a row. nice uptrend. And we end up at the same place 5 days later. But when you're thinking you got a gap and you just end up with a small green candle, hang on, because the second day might be a big green candle, or you might have 3 to 5 days of price movement in the up direction. So it's not an absolute science. And the reason is because the pressures are different in every single example, each and every day. We just try to identify the strength in the movement. When you have a identical pattern, and let's say you have a TOC pattern, that's a top of cycle pattern, and it's a lower pattern, so the right leg is lower. If you have 15 or 20 of those on a peak, you know that the push is stronger and you're going to have a decent downtrend. And it may bounce around a little bit before it goes down for a few days. Who knows? But if you have a TOC lower pattern, at the bottom of a cycle, you have divergence. And divergence is one of the biggest indicators of gaps. And you can have 5 or 6 pairs in divergence. One of the key divergent indicators is swing Zion and swing pink. Swing Zion is a price barometer along with zip pink and the 3 price lines, red, green, and blue. The barometers track the price. When the price goes up, the barometers go up. When the price goes down, they go down. Swing pink is a leading indicator. It moves really fast. It moves in a different way than zip red and zip red and zip pink are the 2 quickest lines in the system. And swing pink moves quickly in one direction or the other, but it doesn't have a lot of line length to it. Whereas zip red will move 30, 40, 60, 80. I've seen it go over 90 points in one day, many times. And when that happens, the zip red the following day will actually go down, but the price will go up. Zip red doesn't follow price like the price barometers. You need to think about what your line is doing when you're reading these lines. It's just like zip pink, which is a price barometer, and zip green, which is the trades in and out of the market. When zip green is at 100 and pink is right under it, the day that zip green hits 100, you have started what is referred to as the pink-green pattern. And that will go on. It could be just that day and then it drops down, or it could go on for 6 or 8 more days. But all the time, zip pink will be should be climbing up and getting closer to the zip green each day. Sometimes it might get buried inside and there'll be the red or gray or yellow or blue zip lines overlaying on top of the zip pink. The rule for the downturn, the signal for the downturn in a pink-green top is when zip green is highest right next to green. If it's not highest and all of a sudden it pops out and becomes the highest, it was underneath some indicator lines, or the indicator, like the blue and the yellow were higher than the pink. Well, when it pops out and becomes the highest, then the following day the price will go down. 90-some% of the time. That's the rule for a pink-green top. There obviously are exceptions. And those exceptions are typically when zip pink is really low. That sounds goofy, but that's what I meant. Now, all of these patterns together make up the three, are not what I've just described. I've described some supporting evidence conditions. When you have patterns or when you have indicator lines in addition to the 3 pattern requirement. So that in essence is what the 3 patterns are about. You have to have all 3. It just doesn't work well if you don't have all 3. You can find a lot of stuff with 15 or 18 or 20 identical patterns, but if you don't have the down touches and the proximity groups, you're not going to get a gap. You may get something, obviously. Look at it this way. If you got 18 indicators that are all in a right leg W pattern, a right leg W higher pattern, you've got a significant level of supporting evidence just in those 18 indicators. Because remember, if you've got 18 indicators in one pattern, you've only got the 5 left going to 22, or 4 left going to 22, that can create a different pattern or create some other signal for you that you could be doing something. So it's relative in some respects, but you gotta have the identical indicators, you gotta have the trend down touches, and you gotta have the proximity group patterns in a good location. We place more emphasis on the location of the proximity group than we do on the specific pattern, specific shapes of the power 4 or power 5. So that's enough for this example. It's gone longer than I wanted to, and that hopefully will clarify your understanding of the 3 gap patterns.